Hello, I'm carrying on with the story about Cranleigh House, which I started yesterday, and I'm going to be speaking about some more exciting things today, including the Holy Well at Cranleigh House. But first of all, I did make a couple of errors yesterday. One is that the Pack of Cards pub is much older than this house, and it was a later landlord in 1860 who decided to build Cranleigh House as an overflow for people to stay in who came to work at the silver mines. But actually, the silver mines was flooded by the water levels at that time, and that particular mine had to close, and so Cranleigh House was not used for very long for the original purpose of being a place where people who came to work at the silver mines might live or stay. I understand it was a coaching inn at that time. It's right on the high street, and probably there were stables around the back. And interestingly, it was also built on the site of the weigh house for the silver mines. I'll come back to that. The other thing I just want to clarify is that the people who we bought the house from, who moved into another place in the village, are John and Sylvia Bennett. And John Bennett, they moved up to live at what had been the London Inn, which was an old pub at the top of the village, which had been turned into several houses, and they bought one of the houses. And John, who joked to me that his house was in the part of the building where he had actually worked in it when it was a restaurant many years before. I think when I first started to come to Combe Martin, that the London Inn was still trading, but it's worth bearing in mind that Combe Martin has changed beyond all recognition from when I first came here in the early 90s for pilgrimages, when there were many shops in the village. Just opposite us, there was a fruit and vegetable shop, there was a newsagent's, and next door to us, the little house, which is called Flower Pots, was a flower shop and always had fresh flowers outside the front. All of those shops have now closed, and so there's a very different flavour to the village. But the good thing is that lots of people in this village do actually live here. It's not just a holiday village. And Cranleigh House went through a lot of different changes. It was for very many years a hotel. The people who ran the hotel actually lived up in the sanctuary. So when we came to look around the house, there were still the plastic wood partitions, probably from the 1970s, and a basin up there, and it was all sectioned off, probably for the people who lived there, or maybe staff or family. And of course, nowadays, with health and safety gone mad, nobody would be able to live up there under the current regulations. So it's perfect that we have it as a yoga room. Anyway, the other man who I mentioned called John is John Stevenson, and it was through his help that we were able to find and buy Cranleigh House. And he is one of my friends. He wrote to me yesterday. He's very pleased that these stories are going out. And so did my friend Gwyneth Evans Wilcox, who was very involved with this project. And John and Gwyneth always supported us by coming to stay here for pilgrimage when we were running as a B&B. So now, going back to the well, this is something from George King that I'm going to read. And this is a picture of George King in 1961 when he was on tour in America with the book that he'd written between February to March in 1961, called The Nine Freedoms, which you can buy from the Aetherius Society or from other booksellers. And I thought I'd like to show you this one because it shows what he would have looked like at the time that Mary King lived in this house. And I also have a picture of Mary King. This one is a nice one. This is also from the Aetherius Society newsletter, and it's a picture of her. You can see she's got a wig on, as is very common probably in those days, and she's got her picnic hamper behind her. And this picture is taken, I recognise it, it's taken from Knapp Down, which is just above the village, and it's probably looking east from what I see. And it looks like she was having a little picnic up there, and who knows, she might even been having a little picnic with George King. And there's another picture of Mary King in this newsletter. This one I can tell you, actually, it's not a newsletter, it's Cosmic Voice. You can see here that's Mary King outside another house. That's not Cranleigh House, but you can see that's Cosmic Voice. And there also is George King's wife, Mary King. This particular edition was dedicated to two special ladies in the life of George King, and it is volume 38, issues 3 and 4, and it was published in 2017. So the other picture of Mary King in this house, which is a nice one, is, I'll have to find it later, I think, because I've closed the magazine and I can't find my page again now. But we'll come back to that. I'll show it to you in another episode. But going back to I Am the Rock, which is a lecture by George King, in which he mentions the Holy Well at Cranleigh House. Now, this lecture is part of a tape series, magnetic tapes, because it would have been produced probably way back when tapes were the only form of recording. And it's an extract from some lectures which were given to his something which he set up, which was called the Mystical Order of St. Peter, and you had to be a member to be able to listen to this information. I was a member for several years. I'm not now a member, but I have a photocopy of this information. So this is the extract about Cranleigh House and the Holy Well. My mother happens to own the house where Joseph of Arimathea came. Not the same house, but onto that particular site, when he came over to England with Jesus as a boy. When he came over to England with Jesus as a boy. And he traded silver there, because they were the largest silver mines in the vicinity. And she, that's Mary King, has a document which doesn't actually say this, but gives the antiquity of this particular house, and so on. These things will be revealed at the right time, but not quite yet. So, as we're often with these kind of adventure stories, you don't come to the end at the beginning. There's a bit of work to do along the way. And that's the photocopy there, which I've been reading from the Mystical Order of St. Peter lecture by Dr. George King, which is entitled I Am the Rock, which is actually a lecture about St. Peter, the mystical aspect of St. Peter's life. Now, this is another interesting document, and it's entitled And a Healing Well. Now, this one is from an Aetherius Society newsletter, and it's on page 17. But unfortunately, I don't have the exact issue of the newsletter, which I can always post up below the video later. So this little article is written by Steve Gibson, who was the then editor and one of the directors of the Aetherius Society, which was the official body that George King set up as an incorporated, as an unincorporated association to spread the teachings which were given through him. So this article says, Eric Tapsell, who wrote the extract that we're going to listen to, was an unusual figure, a prominent member in the early days of the society, that is the Aetherius Society, in the Lake District in the shadow of Old Man. Old Man is Old Man Coniston, which is another one of George King's holy mountains, or charged through masters to be made holy, and I'll again come back to that part of the story later. We cannot say whether his thoughts on Mary King's house in Combe Martin are true, but they are certainly fascinating. Mrs. King's house on the oldest site in Combe Martin, which was an ancient tin and silver mining port, trading with the Mediterranean civilizations of Rome and Phoenicia. The original foundations exist beneath the house. It was the weigh house for silver shipments from mines which were under Holston Down. I'm not so sure that the mines actually were under Holston Down, but there certainly are many mines in Combe Martin and this area, silver mines. Here used to come a rich merchant, Joseph of Arimathea, bringing with him his nephew, a delicate boy named Jesus, between the ages of 7 and 14. Mrs. King found water flooding the lower premises. The water board knew of no pipes there or any other source, but it was found that a deep well existed beneath the house, 20 feet down, and the water from this unsuspected source had broken its way out. Mrs. King then remembered a mysterious saying by Mars Sector 8. Mars Sector 8 is what we would call in our spiritual tradition, which is that of George King and the Aetherius Society, a cosmic master, which is another thing which we'll come back to, whom she had a short time previously met in the house. He had said something about when the well shall be unsealed. So, this is an interesting story about this well, which Mary King had a message about from a cosmic master, or you could call him an elevated being, who is called Mars Sector 8. He was one of the people who George King had contacts with, and again we'll come back to this in a later episode. But there are great beings associated with Cranleigh House, and the energy here is very how would I describe it? It's very powerful because I think of the great beings who've been associated with this location since biblical times. Now, you might say, well, all of this sounds quite fanciful, and it may do, but a lot of evidence shows that Joseph of Arimathea was a very wealthy merchant. Some people say he was one of the wealthiest men in the world, and that he came often to the West Country from the Holy Land, and that Jesus, who was his great nephew, came with him. Joseph of Arimathea was the brother-in-law of Jesus's mother, grandmother. So the mother of Mary, his mother, was a lady called Anne of Cornwall, and she was a princess or a queen or a very high, or a lady of very high status in Cornwall. And Joseph of Arimathea was her brother-in-law. Now, you might say, well, that's all very interesting. How come Jesus's grandmother was English? And this is because of a very strong connection between the Druids and those of the Druid, you could say, royal line or people of great status who lived in the British Isles, and they were associated with, for example, Caractacus, who you can look up. And Caractacus had dealings with Rome. And in fact, the Romans couldn't, from memory, overcome Caractacus. They did in the end, and he actually was allowed to live with his family in Rome. And so there was a lot of traffic between Rome and England at that time, and an association between the Druids and the people in Rome. And also this is connected with the origins of Christianity. So that's, again, a big story, and other people have done a lot more research on that than I have. I've got several of the books, which I can again show you on future parts of this story. So coming back now to Joseph of Arimathea and a possible visit of Joseph of Arimathea with the Master Jesus when he was a young boy to this site to drink from the holy well, or to visit this site, because it was also the way house for the silver mines, and he was a merchant, a very well-known merchant, possibly one of the wealthiest men in the world at that time. And according to other research by other people, he was a minister, or the minister for mines in the Roman Senate at that time. So that's another really kind of interesting twist to this story. And you can research all these things. Don't take my word for it. I'm the messenger. And there's a lot of elements to this story. There's so much to it, in fact, that you could spend your whole life researching it. So, and you wouldn't do anything else. But we have to, kind of chop wood and carry water every day. Well, that's what I find I'm having to do anyway. So, sometimes literally, not every day though. So, going back to the well, this well was unsealed in the time of Mary King, and it was popular amongst the pilgrims who used to come down from London maybe only once a year, because there was so much work to do, and this pilgrimage was usually at that time on the 23rd of July every year. Nowadays it's usually on the Saturday nearest to the 23rd of July to make it easier for people who are working to get down here at the weekend. And people would come to Cranleigh House, and I know this from my friend John Stevenson, and they would bring their bottles, and George King's father would fill them up from the well, which had an old-fashioned pump on the wall. Now, this is an interesting part of the story. When we came here, we understood that Cranleigh House, the part that we have, which is called Cranleigh House, was the part that Mary King bought and lived in. But actually, when we spoke to a local hairdresser, and apologies, I can't remember her name now, she was the niece of the man who owned Lonsdale House, which is right next door to Cranleigh House, and it all was one big building. It was a great big hotel. She said that Mary King owned the whole building, so Lonsdale and Cranleigh. And the well, she remembered the well from her childhood, from the 60s, because her uncle bought the house from Mary King, and he immediately had the well sealed up again. So she couldn't remember exactly where it was, but she knew it was there, and she knew that water had been taken from the well previously. So, and when we went to visit our neighbours, Steve and his wife, former wife Claire, they showed us when their what I call their back bit, which probably would hundreds and thousands of years ago been a courtyard, or it would have been outside. The well is likely to have been communal. They showed us, or we found, because actually they didn't really know about it, where the pump used to be on the wall. And we could see where the pipe had been cut off, and it was just going into the ground, but we didn't know where it was leading. It could have been in their side of the house, or it could have been in our side of the house. So we weren't any closer to knowing where the well was. We knew it was somewhere, because we read about it and we knew it was in action, or it had been in action, but we didn't know where it was. So we spent a lot of time looking for it in 2000, in the next year, in I think it was 2008 and 2009. Anyway, going back to the 1960s, the pilgrims would come and they would get the water from the Holy Well. And it says in this little article, the water has now been channeled and tapped and has healing properties rivaling those of Lourdes. So again, this was like, wow, this is an amazing story, and this well is somewhere in our house or next door, and it really would be fantastic to be able to find it. So I want to say needle in a haystack, even though it was a well underground. We have lots of friends who are interested in metaphysics, and lots of friends who do dowsing with the pendulum. I should have my pendulum. It's in my handbag at the moment. But we had all our friends down, and to see if we could find the well. I think we were down here anyway, actually. We were down here for another pilgrimage, and that one was on the 23rd of November, and it was at Brown Willie, and that's, again, another yearly pilgrimage to a small mountain or hill, which is called Brown Willie. I'm just going to find my pendulum, because actually these pendulums were designed by George King, a radionic pendulum. Mine is extremely well used, so it looks a little black, but actually these pendulums are made at the Ethereal Society, and they were made out of beechwood, and they're very, very light, so very, very easy to use, and very easy to allow the energy to flow through. You just put the silk over your hand and allow the energy. You want to have your hand down low. I'm just demonstrating up here because of the because of the video. So we all got out our pendulums, and we had several people who decided they knew exactly where we had to drill for the well. And so we had crosses all around the floor of our back room, which was at that time the laundry room, and also in the downstairs loo. And so we had various places, and Stuart, who's got a background in engineering, and he was an aircraft fitter for many years. He has a big drill, and we got some long bits, very long. I don't know how long they were, maybe 24 inches or something like that, to get down through the concrete to see if we could find the well. I mean, it was a bit, looking back on it, it was a little bit haphazard. I think we thought that we were going to drill through and suddenly find a void. I think that was our plan at the time. Anyway, we drilled in various places. People, all of us were people who did meditation and spiritual practices and breathing exercises from George King, and we were tuning in to find the well. But in the end, the only void that we did drill into was our poo pipe. So that was a bit impractical. And we then had to take up the whole floor to repair the drain. As Stuart and I were running detox programs and running as a B&B, and that was our laundry room, it was quite impractical. We had to dig up the whole floor. It was filled with earth, and we thought, I think we'll just put this to bed at the moment, this exercise, and we need to make some money and run a business. And we were comforted by George King's words in the lecture, I Am the Rock. These things will be revealed at the right time, but not quite yet. And we thought that probably we hadn't done enough spiritual work or had the right kind of karma to be able to uncover this well. But we knew it was there, and we thought that we would get more clues as to its whereabouts. At the same time, we also met a lovely man called Mitch, who was he was really one of the people who had put so much energy into the Combe Martin silver mines, which are very much there's been so much work done on the Combe Martin silver mines. I'll just show you. This is the journal of the Combe Martin silver mines, and it's an incredible resource. I mean, it's extraordinary to think that in this small village that we have silver mines that date back, it seems, from the story of Joseph of Arimathea, at least 2,000 years. And they have been left quite untouched to a degree, and they're not mining silver currently because of the water levels, and it rains a lot in Devon. And the sea level has affected some of the adits, which are the mine drains. And this, again, is a huge subject. I can only touch on it here. And if you would like to know more about it, then you can. I'm a member of the Combe Martin silver mines, and they have meetings, and they go up to the silver mines, and they're doing a lot of work up there. So you can talk to them. The chairman is an archaeologist called Peter Clawton, and the mine captain is Max Boyce, and the secretary is Lorna Darch. And you can talk to these people if you want more information about the silver mines. Again, that's another huge part of the story, and you can visit the silver mines on Sundays. They generally have an open morning, and you can actually go down the mine. So I plucked up my courage and went down a few fathoms, but you can go down a lot further. So exciting to have these silver mines here, and exciting to have all these people who are very knowledgeable and interested in archaeology. So we asked Mitch to come round to our house, and he came round with some other people and had a look, and he said that he didn't know anything about the well, but he did know that there was a mine at it which crossed from went across the car park of the Pack of Cards, crossed the road fairly close to our house outside the Pack of Cards pub, and went into the river at the end of a lane which is just down from the Pack of Cards down towards the sea. And there's an area of swamp there where you can see that the water flows down, and it takes the water out from the mines, and it took it into the river because that was obviously a place where it could then drain into the sea. So he did say that there were a lot of wells in Combe Martin, and in fact the land behind our house is called Ringers Meadow, Wringers, and that is supposed to mean a field of springs. And as you can imagine, Combe Martin is this narrow valley going down to the sea, masses of rainfall on the tops and on the sides, flowing down to the bottom. So there would have been lots of sources of water. And we know that at Chute Lane, which is just down from Cranleigh House, as you go down to the sea, it's on the right, Chute as in Shute, there was a public spring there, which I have a picture of, and again I can show you in a later episode. And so people would have come to get water from there. As you possibly know, many of the wells and springs have actually been covered up, have been sealed, which used to be used because it was there before mains water. That would have been the water source where people went with a pail to pick up the water, as George King did when he lived in Yorkshire, North Yorkshire. He would go walk, I think it was over a mile to get the water. So we are living in times with taps and water coming out into the kitchen and the bathroom, which people didn't have the luxury of at those times. But there's a bit of a different take on it, which is that, of course, when we had access to our own water, then we were independent. Now we're dependent on South West Water or London Board of Water to bring us our water. And there's a degree of I think sadness amongst these springs and wells, which were supplying mankind with the holy waters from the earth, bringing us fresh water, vortex water, living water, not water through, in our case, a lead pipe. And it's rather an old one, and which we've replaced mostly, and through pipes that by the time the water comes out through our taps, this is not hasn't got the living charge and energy that it would have had from the past. So it is an amazing thing to have our own water supply. And another thing about this is that some people say, and it does make sense to me, that the springs actually feel tremendously upset that they've been sealed over and covered, because that was part of their, you could say, service to mankind, to be a source and a flow of water for us. And from a friend of mine whose name is Bridget, I understand that many springs and were dedicated to St. Bridget in this country. And she taught me about the spirit of place and about the energy of a place. And she taught me about to have respect for springs and water. And I sensed that there was a lot of sadness, that this particular well, which would have been used for, it seems, thousands, hundreds, thousands of years, had been stopped up. So I knew that we were going to come back to this at some point, because it was an important job to do. So anyway, we were setting about creating our yoga room in the sanctuary, if you remember, from in the attic of the house, which is what Mary King had. She dedicated it to the Master Jesus. And we met one of our back neighbours, who was called Terry Burgess, and his brother John Burgess, and their father was called Cyril Burgess, and they lived in a house up above us in Valley Lane called Sunnycott. I think that's the name of their house. And it's on the left-hand side. It's a beautiful old cottage on the hill. And we asked Terry about the well. And this is another amazing part of the story. Terry said that he was actually there when Mary King, when the well was uncovered. Because if you remember from this article, it said that Mrs. King, this is the article about from Eric Tapsell, and Steve Gibson wrote it for the Ethereal Society newsletter. Mrs. King found water flooding the lower premises. The water board knew of no pipes there or any other source, but it was found that a deep well existed beneath the house 20 feet down, and the water from this unsuspected source had broken its way out. So she asked Terry and his father Cyril to come down. Terry, I think, was 19 at that time in 1960. So you can tell how old he is now. 2023. And they did a lot of digging about, and they discovered a beautiful well with stones, and Terry described it to me. And I think they had water from the well too, but I think they had their own well. They didn't need to come down to this well to get the water. And they uncovered it for Mary King, and they probably made it safe, and maybe Cyril found the person to put the pump in. I don't know that side of the story, but that's what enabled the well to produce water. Now, at that time, we didn't know what the well exactly looked like, but Terry said it wasn't that deep. It was only about 20 foot deep. He agreed with that. And he said he couldn't remember where the well was, but he knew when he was sitting on Steve's back steps, that's our next door neighbour, he could see the well in front of him. So that gave us at least a clue. And the back bit, it was like a kind of it's been probably in 1860 it might have been turned, it looks like it was coal bunkers or something. It could have been storage, and I guess it would have been outside, because from Lonsdale and Cranleigh House there's a couple of steps down into what would have been a backyard. That's what we think. And so Terry was pretty sure that the well was there. So that was another part of the well story, and this video is to be continued shortly. Well, this series is to be continued shortly. Thank you very much for listening. Bye.